Afternoon, Shiran. Second time in a week, and that's quite interesting given the lack of time we sometimes find in our schedules. Today, I also want to talk a little bit more in detail about the IMF and this entire negotiation process and the effects the IMF staff agreement is going to have on our economy, because it's done in a very shady manner. It's done in a very undemocratic manner, if I say so. How we declared bankruptcy and how we actually deal about our financial situation since then until IMF staff agreement was agreed to, and then how we are keeping it from the people, and then also trying to give them false hope that the situation is going to become different and better in 2 3 months time. Now everything is okay. We all know, you and me both know, this is not the case. So today I want to discuss you three major things. One is the manner we declared our bankruptcy, how undemocratic it is, how I have never personally seen anywhere in any other bankruptcy case done in this manner, without the knowledge of the population, without the knowledge of the cabinet of ministers, without the knowledge of the parliament. Purely by a group of technocrats who have assumed the role of the constitution, and the executive and the judiciary, the legislation, executive and the judiciary. Secondly, how we went about with the negotiations, what could have been different, and then the effects of it, and exactly also what the IMF program is, because we don't have a full transparent copy on what the agreement is, but we know generally what the conditions are, more or less. So I want you to actually talk a little bit about it, and then secondly, what would be the effects of this entire process right now on us, on the economy, and what the people should expect in the next year. Finally, number three, what people should do, and how we could actually take back this discourse into people's hand and try to change it, so the economy actually become economy that serves everyone, not just the super rich in Sri Lanka, and the people who own the sovereign and the local debt, you know. So to start with, my first question is, Shiran, how do you actually see the process of declaring bankruptcy? How undemocratic the discussions, and how exclusive the discussion was around the bankruptcy? What happened from that point onwards until the staff agreement was agreed to? What the agreement is, as far as you understand, the 6 7 points that you were also talking about a little bit before, and what could have been done differently? Why
Hmm.
why 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 we are in this place today, and how what happened in the last 8 months resulted in the crisis today?
So, first of all, I think it's probably still controversial to say this, but I think there was no reason to default. The
Yes.
Chinese embassy is now on record in a press conference stating that they tried to do everything possible to help Sri Lanka not default, and eventually that the Sri Lankan government chose to default. Those are the exact words that they used. And before they made that statement, I and certain other people that I know had heard through like political back channels that there were a lot of deals on the table. There were discussions ongoing with Gulf countries about getting energy for cheap. There were discussions with China and with Russia. For some reason or the other, most likely geopolitical pressure, the government chose to default. But even in as you said, the process in which they did that, I mean, there was no real process, right? If I remember correctly, it wasn't even any elected government official that formally announced it or declared it, right? It was, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the central bank, right? It was the central
Yes,
bank governor,
Nandalal,
right?
Governor Nandalal.
Exactly. So there was no public discussion on this in any way, shape, or form. There was no informed public opinion about it. There was no, I mean, people, I think people are probably still unaware of what it means to default, right? What it means not just for you, but most likely like your children, because this is, renegotiating debt. It's not a process that's going to end in a few years. Greece is still doing it. Argentina is still doing it. It's this is we've tied ourselves down to a very long period of these painful negotiations and sort of geopolitical meddling and pressure and all of those things. And it's like you said, it's done in a completely undemocratic way where there was no real discussion of what the real consequences are. And as I mentioned, the tragedy is that my opinion is that it didn't even have to it didn't have to happen. So firstly, I think the government is obviously should be blamed for not managing the currency reserves properly, right? So the liberal sort of lobbyists will say that the main issue was this fixing of the exchange rate and then running down of the reserves to protect that exchange rate. There's an element of truth to that, I think. So you can fix and manage an exchange rate. I think basically all countries with a trade surplus do that. So China does that, the US does that, the EU and Germany do that. Um, so there's nothing fundamentally wrong with fixing the exchange rate. I think, in fact, it's desirable to have a stable exchange rate and
Yes.
as a way of controlling the price of inputs, controlling inflation, and so on. The problem is the government didn't go as hard as they could have gone in terms of controlling those imports. So they had very, I think, minor, like compared to what was done in the 1970s, what countries like Vietnam did in crisis. It was not serious with the way they tried to limit
Yes.
imports and consumption. Of course, they got a huge amount of backlash from that, from like the liberal lobby and the import lobby and all the merchant and trader groups or whatever. But what they did was, very nominal in the grand scheme of things. In fact, now we've defaulted, and now we're rationing fuel, right? And the whole process of rationing fuel with the QR code, it's not like a perfect system, but I think it's a good idea. It's a good start. This is such a simple solution that could have been done at any point in recent Sri Lankan history
Yes.
in a month, right? It
Yes.
took them less than a month to come up with this system. If they were serious about it, they could probably refine it and more or less perfect it in 2 3 months. This could have been done at any point in the last 10 20 years. Um,
Actually,
just to
Shiran, to make an import, a group that I actually work with, we make a very sound proposal to the authorities way back in March, April, that we need to ration fuel, and we need to actually allocate fuel to these industries, and we need to prioritize public transport, and we actually showed that how many billions we can save just by doing this, and then they just chose to ignore us.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem, because like people have been saying this for so long, and it was always painted as this despotic, tyrannical thing, and because you're not supposed to intervene in markets, for these like liberals, democracy means like a free market, so the government should not intervene in the market, right? Um, and again, I think that's a major reason why we end up here, because of that sort of zero sum game thinking.
And Shiran, one important thing that I want to now ask you about. Um, it was very clear the process was undemocratic. I heard that, I don't know whether this is true or not. If it's not true, the former president Gotabaya Rajapaksa can correct this if he's listening to this. That the central bank governor actually told him that this is not a real default, and not to worry, and he's managing everything, and kind of misled the president in getting him to not to be angry with him for doing what he was going to do, and so
Hmm.
it's a I mean, in a normal country, people should be in jail, but this is, we are talking about Sri Lanka. This financial mafia, they will never go into prison. They'll rather go to Australia. I think Nandalal at the end of the day will also go back to his home country in Australia. That's another different matter. The point I want to ask you, like, even in the negotiations, did Sri Lanka actually try to negotiate with a good faith to defend the interest of the national economy, to defend the interest of the population, or did they actually play into the IMF zero sum game and end up actually putting Sri Lanka even more deeper into this debt trap? And then, for example, there were no discussion about debt cancellation. IMF have cancelled debt for so many countries in Africa who couldn't afford to pay debt. China actually have set a precedent cancelling debt for a number of African countries. I mean, but Sri Lanka was actually no, we want to actually pay you in full, and even in a village in Sri Lanka, when the local moneylender or the bank actually give money that people can't pay back, the state intervene. I mean, how many times we actually cancel debt of farmers, how many times we are cancelling debt of the super rich business people in Colombo who do import export businesses, huh? But that was not part of our discussion. That was not even focused on. That was not even seen as a legitimate talking point. How could this happen?
Well, it's a taboo subject, right, to talk about debt forgiveness or debt cancellation, because I mean the way the government and all these institutions are set up is to defend the interests of the creditor, not the debtor,
Yes.
right? All these multinational institutions and so on. And the Sri Lankan government, whoever's in power is always hell bent on making sure that they pay their debts. I think for good reason as well, because if you don't pay your debt as a leader, you're probably going to get couped or regime changed or
Yes.
assassinated or something like that. Um, of course, I think there's been no negotiation. Like, I don't know if anyone, I don't know um, what is on the table, right? So, for example, I recall that South Korea in the 90s, even when they defaulted, they went to the creditors and to the IMF with their own sort of list of, it's kind of like a green light, yellow light, red light concept, right? So it's like these are the reforms we're willing to do. These are the reforms that we can discuss, and these things you cannot touch them; they're off the table. So I think there's no sort of process like that as far as I can see in Sri Lanka. I think there's never been even throughout the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, right? It seems like what happened in the 70s with the opening up of the economy, they went through all this structural adjustment, and in exchange for that, they were just, they had projects like the Mahavali project or Premadas's housing project. So they had some sort of infrastructure building framework to compensate for that. But all of those things generally put us into even more debt.
Yes.
Uh, this time, I think all of that Keynesian stuff is also off the table, right? No one is coming to us with, okay, you do austerity here, and then we'll also do a few infrastructure projects to like keep your population calm and
Yeah.
give
Yeah.
them some jobs and housing. That doesn't seem to be on the table, and I don't think the US or the EU have the money or the means to do those things either. And unfortunately, we seem to be turning away from China and Russia, who probably have the means to help us do those things. So this is very, very dangerous territory for us. I don't know like where it'll go, because when you don't have a leader that can at the very least draw a red line and say like, okay, these are the things that we cannot compromise on, that's an issue, because now everything's on the table.
And that's a very good point actually, to get into my next question, which is a very important one. Everyone talks about staff level agreement in English, and in Sinhala the government try to convince that, oh, this is not agreement, this is ekangatawe. I mean, this is simple Google translation if somebody have a doubt what agreement means, whether it's ekangatawe or not. And now, as you said, everything is on the table. All the national assets, all the golden gooses we have, including the ports, including the airports, including the CB, CPC, everything is on the table, including the state banks, the three main state banks, the People's Bank, the Ceylon, Bank of Ceylon, and the National Savings Bank. They are also on the table. The government is also not doing anything really to reject the demand on reforming or restructuring local debt. the point, if you do, there will be no national economy left after 1 year. But they seem to not really understand, or either don't care. But Shiran, then doing all this, what did we got in return? What are the IMF agreement conditions right now? What are they pushing? What is really on the table as far as you know?
Okay, so we can actually pull up the IMF staff agreement right now and maybe go through point by point and see what they're asking for, right? So key elements of the program, I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points. So maybe we can spend some time going through them, right?
Yes, yes,
The
yes,
first
yes.
one is to raise fiscal revenue to support fiscal consolidation. So, for most people on the left or financialists, this sends alarm bells ringing because this is what you generally associate with austerity, right? Fiscal
Yes.
consolidation means you reduce spending and you increase government revenue. This time, however, the IMF and I think even the World Bank are going on the kind of propaganda blitz to say that no, we're not asking for austerity. We're not going to ask to reduce social spending. In fact, we're going to ask to increase social spending and have direct cash transfers for the poor. And how we're going to finance that is by massively increasing the tax base, right?
Yes.
And also having cost reflective pricing of energy, which is actually one of the points here as well as cost reflective
Yes.
pricing.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I mean, so like independently, all those sound like good things, right? That you would basically not reduce social spending and you would increase taxation. And I think to an extent, anyone, including myself, would agree with that. But the way that's going to happen is that you're basically going to be increasing taxes on wages and most likely industrial profits. And even though they say this on paper, we all know that in practice the government is going to go for indirect taxes, right?
Yes.
In practice, there's no way they're going to have the will to go for direct taxes. The burden is still going to fall on like the majority of low income people.
And Shiran, to
And
make an input to that, the IMF itself in the press conference said, yes, we would like to have direct taxes, but then doing direct taxes right, it takes time, it takes few years. So right now, the best way is to do indirect taxes, and even this
yeah,
so-called social security tax. I mean, I've never heard anything like this anywhere else. They are putting more tax on the food and the staple of the most poor people, saying that we need that money to give them cash transfers. I mean, that's a contradiction itself. I mean,
yeah. I mean, and what's crazy is the target they've put, right? So they want to reach a primary surplus of 2.3% of GDP
yes,
by 2025.
that's super aggressive.
Um, yeah, I mean, this has never been done before in any other country, as far as I know. In fact, I actually saw someone from the IMF on Twitter saying that this was like a very ambitious goal. And we know that Sri Lanka has almost never been able to meet these lofty goals, right? Most of our IMF agreements, we've never been able
Yes.
to fiscally consolidate so aggressively because it's going to shrink the economy. So yeah, anyway, the first point is fiscal revenue. That links to the second point, which is cost recovery based pricing for fuel and electricity. So basically, what they want to do is minimize the fiscal risk from state-owned enterprises,
Yes.
right? We talked about this the other day, but they want to make state-owned enterprises profitable. And yes, you can do that, but you can do that at the expense of shrinking the rest of the economy and shrinking the GDP. So in effect, what you have is like your debt to GDP ratio is going to go up, right? Because your economy is shrinking, but your debt still grows. It grows with compound interest. So if your
Actually,
debt
the
is
rate
growing at
it
four
goes
percent,
up
your
is
economy is
going to be
shrinking.
faster. The rate it's going
Yeah,
to go up will be even more faster because the economy is shrinking and the debt is rising at the same time.
exactly, exactly. And then right. So okay. So they've talked about raising social spending. That's point number three. We discussed that. Then now they talk about restoring price stability through data-driven monetary policy action. Not entirely sure
What that
what
means.
they mean by that, right?
Yes.
But okay. So price stability. So they want cost recovery based pricing for fuel. So prices go up. They want to raise fiscal revenue, so taxes go up, and then they're talking about price stability. So I mean, we're
So,
not going to see price stability in the next 2, 3 years if you do this
yes,
program.
yes,
We're going to see a skyrocketing of
agreed.
inflation and prices.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. And then this is a kicker. They say to phase out monetary financing and stronger central bank autonomy. So this links to what we discussed in our last meeting where we talked about how they basically want to make the central bank independent to ensure that it can't finance the government budget. So we generally agree using the central bank to finance the government's recurrent expenditure is not a great idea. But at the same time, you need to have a central bank that can finance industrial investment, that can finance
Yes,
productive investment, capital investment rather than recurrent expenditure, right? So even though they use this fiscal thing as an excuse, in the long term, what's going to happen is they will make the central bank independent, and then you basically have no means to monetarily finance your industries and
yes.
your development.
And on top of this, I read an article by Dr. Manmohan Singh. He said, I will try to draw that slide on our video when I publish this. He clearly said, I mean, printing money is not ideal, but if the option is to print money and then keep education, health, and defense financed, then if that's the last option, then so be it. Because without it, then the education will collapse, the health will collapse, the defense will collapse, and I understand the neoliberal zombie economists in Colombo, they hate the term defense and the military, but then Sri Lanka also need to really think of its national security and sovereignty right now. This is the
Yeah.
most critical moment that we need to focus, even more critical than when Prabhakaran was alive, or when the Indian army was occupy part of Sri Lanka's territory in the north and east. So uh, I understand. I agree with you. I'm printing money is not ideal, but then what option we have right now is to borrow money for 30-40% interest rate from the local bond market. I mean, which
Yeah.
government, Shiran? I mean, enlighten me if you know any government who can run their operations by borrowing money at a moneylender's interest rate.
True, true. And I mean, the other thing is that anyone who is very senior in the global financial system, right? So that's this guy Zoltan Foza, I think. He works at Credit Suisse. He's an analyst at Credit
Senior
Suisse, and
analyst,
he's an
yes.
expert on monetary history and monetary policy, right? Um, so there's only one monetary policy in the world that matters, and that's the U.S. monetary policy, because
Yes,
they print global reserve currency. They have the absolute privilege of doing that, right?
yes.
So by trying to say Sri Lanka is like that money printing in Sri Lanka is the cause of inflation.
It's
I mean, you have to be blind to the entire global financial system, right? Money printing in Sri Lanka is not increasing the global price of oil, right? It's the US money printing. Like the most amount of money that has been printed has been in the US since 2008, like
yes,
trillions and trillions.
yes,
Same with the EU. In fact, if you look at money printing as a proportion of GDP in the last few years, especially in the wake of COVID-19, it's developed economies have printed the least. The advanced economies have printed the most.
yes. Actually,
Yeah.
to another point, I'm sorry, I'm making too many intersections, inputs to your points.
No worries.
Switzerland, they have printed 600 to 700 times more, and the inflation is almost negative. So, to argue that money printing is the sole reason why inflation goes up, it's there's no facts
Yeah.
to back it up. Maybe on somebody's book written in somewhere in Harvard or Stanford, but not in real life economy. I mean, not anywhere in the world, for that matter.
Yeah, I mean, in this next point, the IMF talks about rebuilding foreign reserves through restoring a market-determined flexible exchange rate. So, I mean, we've had that for a couple of months now. We've not seen remittances pick up, and now
Yes.
the excuse people give is that the foreign migrants are too concerned about corruption, and therefore they're not
No, that's
sending
not the
money.
reason.
I'm not entirely convinced about that.
Yeah, that's not the
Um,
reason. I'm a foreign
yeah.
migrant. I live in Belgium. That's not the reason. Trust me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because migrants are also living in countries that are kind of going through inflation, so
Yes.
their incomes are being deflated basically in other countries, and And basically, I think even exporters have gone on record saying how the devaluation has affected them because the cost of inputs have gone up,
Yes.
right? So you're not going to see reserves rising. It doesn't. The devaluation doesn't give any competitive advantage. I mean, I've spoken to people who who process agricultural goods. Like that, I spoke to this guy who has a company that makes juice,
Yes.
right? Like good out of fruits, and they have distribution points across the country. And they were only in the domestic market. And when the devaluation happened, he thought to himself, "This is a very good time to export." But what he realized is, with the devaluation, the cost structure went up so much that it didn't make a difference. It was basically the same as if they hadn't devalued. It didn't make his product more competitive in terms of exporting.
Yes.
So you're not really going to see foreign reserves build up. I think that's extremely foolish.
And part of
Um,
the major part of the loss of CPC and CEB right now is because of the devaluation, because they are
yeah,
not getting. I mean, the reason why they are not having enough rupees to buy the dollar is this the devaluation.
true, true. And another aspect is that the devaluation makes the budget deficit even worse because the rupee amount that the government has to pay for foreign loans keeps increasing.
Yes.
I mean, this is a typical colonial policy, right, where you tax the population to pay tribute to a foreign power.
Yes.
So, they basically want us to increase taxes. And in some sense, it's immaterial whether it's taxes on indirect taxes on the people or direct taxes on capitalists, because either way, you're kind of shrinking the economy to pay foreign debt.
Yes.
You're just sending tribute, and also this is a cycle of tightening. So the Federal Reserve in the U.S. is increasing their interest rates, which is making the dollar stronger, which is making the Sri Lankan rupee weaker. So we're devaluing even further.
Actually, this
And
is what the
this is
British did in with the East India Company in India. For 100 plus years, they tax the local population, then take the tax money, pay for the local production, and then take that product out of India to British industries, and then get them to sell the finished product back to India. And this is what we are doing. This is
yeah,
exactly what we are doing. But instead of 1800s, we are doing it in 2022 under a republic.
yeah. Exactly. And the next 2 points of the IMF like staff level agreement is to safeguard financial stability, blah blah blah, with a revised banking act. So this is what I said about about the monetary policy. So they're basically going to try to crush any hope of having a development bank, any hope of having an activist central bank that's going to finance industries. Then they talk about reducing corruption through fiscal transparency, and introducing strong anti-corruption legal framework, and conducting in-depth government diagnostic supported by IMF technical assistance. So this is like an outright intrusion into
Our
the
financial
system,
sovereignty. It
right?
literally says that
I
we have
mean,
to hand over our financial sovereignty to some bunch of white
yeah,
men
basically, I mean,
from IMF.
basically to allow these external consultants to structure our
In
institutions and the
other
way they're
words,
coded.
to let the financial hitman, economic hitman,
Hmm.
to come into the central bank and dictate their terms. This is what
Yeah,
the last condition is about. If somebody want to
exactly.
know about it, read this book. It's a good book. It is also in Sinhala.
Oh, it's insane.
Yeah, yeah. They published a translation some time ago. I haven't read the Sinhala version, but have read the English version.
Hmm. So yeah, I mean that's the IMF approach, and it seems pretty grim to be honest. There's no mention anywhere about trade deficit. If you
Yes,
read any IMF
nothing.
report on Sri Lanka or a developing country, they almost never use the term trade deficit because it's taboo to talk about trade deficits.
When we actually went to IMF in 1978 under Jaya Javadana, because he actually opened up the economy, and in return he got this investment from Mahavali, which we paid 6 times more than what we should have actually spent on that project. Our trade deficit was, I mean, it was a surplus in 1978, early 1978. By the time it ended, it was negative, and it lasted until now. So if somebody
Yeah.
actually want to understand the effects of IMF policies on Sri Lankan trade deficit, just look the graph. Look at the graph. It's the only point where we actually had a trade surplus is under Sirimava when we were not really going in line with the IMF policies. I mean, Sirimava also had a working relationship with them. It's not that she just kicked them out, but then she actually
No.
took the advice with a grain of salt and then took what she could take and still prioritize national interest. And the problem is we don't do that anymore. Um,
No.
but Shiran, I mean, these 7 points, I was also listening to the press conference and then I wrote everything I wanted to cover. But I mean, they are full of contradictions. And what
They
would
are.
they? I mean, I really don't understand how you actually marry the price of fuel and energy for the lower segment of the society, the small and medium enterprises, with the international energy market that is run on manipulation, energy manipulation, without even having a windfall tax scheme for whatever reason, and then talk about price stability and building foreign. I mean, this is it. These are not things you can have in the same document even. Not forget about the same
Yeah,
sentence.
yeah.
What would be the effect in real life? The real life effects on the people, the economy, especially the rural economy. What are they looking for, and how they should actually try to manage this?
I don't know how the rural economy is going to manage it. I remember when the cost of fuel first started going up, I spoke to this guy he owns a bunch of boats in Matara,
Mm.
and he's into fishing and stuff. And even I never thought about this, right? Because I'm basically also a Kalambot in some ways, right? So I don't know like the real economies. No economist talks about this. So he basically said that when the price of fuel goes up to a certain level, then you just don't go fishing because there's no profit. It doesn't make sense, right? So
Yeah.
tell me, is there anyone in the Sri Lankan central bank or in the treasury who has made that calculation
No.
at and it should be a very simple financial model to make. At what point, when you increase the price of fuel, does certain economic activity just stop, just completely, come to a standstill,
Actually, this
right?
question was asked from Nandalal in the parliament. If you remember the arrogant, condescending answer the central bank governor gave to the MPs who are asking what is your economic model, like how much the inflation would be, how much the unemployment would be, what would be the effect on different industries. He said he can't actually reveal the data. I mean, he was speaking to the parliament as if he's
Yeah.
the governor general appointed by King Charles III.
I mean, it's the responsibility of the central bank to give data to industry so that they can plan, so that they can
Yes.
plan in the long term, right? So they can know, how to adjust their investments and their operations and all of that. But that's not what the central bank does because our central bank has never served our production base, our industry, or our
Yes.
workers or farmers. And this that's still not enough. That the IMF wants us to go even further and remove the option entirely off the table. That we will never be able to do that. Um, I
I
think
have.
when it comes to stuff like fuel, right? It's energy price in the world has not been determined by markets for a very long time.
Yes.
Energy price is determined by geopolitics, and it's determined by your allies, and it's determined by a bunch of cartels and commodity traders, determined by OPEC, and all of those things. So if it's not just a matter of changing the price of electricity; it's also making strategic geopolitical decisions. The IMF can't help with that, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, our foreign policy think tanks don't talk about that or help with that either. India has been, very smart with how it's handled its relationship with
Yes.
Russia to make sure
Yes.
it gets cheap energy. China has been very smart as well. Um, we
I mean, our
can,
think tanks, it's an insult to think tanks in general to call them think tanks. They are just, they're just publishing what they have been told to publish, generally. And in most cases, in policy terms, I mean, they are understand. I mean, I don't know what their understanding of public policy, but whatever that may be, whatever they say in public domain is just, I mean, like redrafted versions of State Department talking points.
yeah, basically.
But Shiran, I mean, I was thinking how Sri Lanka could come out of this trap. I mean, I personally think people need to take the political the discussion around this topic into their own hands. Namely, they need to actually get a grip on the situation. They need to wake up from this cloud cuckoo and dream that they have been asked to sleep into by the central bank, by the government, and by the IMF, and all the other crooks and cronies in the financial mafia in Colombo. The two famous NED, the National Endowment of Democracy funded so-called think tanks, also putting more incentive into people to believe this nonsense. I think they need to wake up and they need to understand what's happening, and they need to figure out how they could actually create a political climate for the coming elections, for example, or the coming year, where politicians, either the establishment politicians or a new breed of politicians, whoever may be, have no other choice but to listen to the people and change the way, change the direction we are going in. How do you actually say it?
I always have trouble with your political questions, Sankar, because I really don't know. Can you phrase it another way?
I can. Do you think people have an opportunity if they actually support a very well informed public movement for reforms and restructuring and reorientation from the foreign policy into our all the way into the way our economy is structured and the composition, with the very composition of the economy. Do they have a, do you think there's a realistic chance for people to actually, even if they understand what is really going on and what need to be done, and if a movement comes that would allow people to structure the solutions they already know about, from
Hmm.
agriculture to industry to education to health, do you think there's a realistic opportunity for people to actually change it? If I'm not talking about this 1917 style like October Revolution stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
That's unrealistic. It doesn't work in South Asian context. But could people actually rely on a very democratic revolutionary mindset in order to change this? I mean, don't mis. I mean, for the
Hmm.
viewers, don't misinterpret the term revolutionary. I'm merely using it as an opportunity to decolonize our economy and restructure everything from political spectrum
Yeah.
to social and economic side. Uh, how do you see?
Well, I guess I can borrow from Gramsci and say pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will, right? So
Yes, yes, yes.
intellectually, I feel like the chances are dim, but you know, if you're politically inclined, politically engaged, you have to have that optimism and like the will to sort of try and make it happen through through whatever means that you can, whether it's just having discussions or whether it's organizing at a more local level and trying to get the message across. Um, I think I think it's probably a good time. Like politics works in cycles that kind of mirror the economic cycle. So I'm a Marxist, so I kind of nerd out about this technical stuff about business cycles and profitability cycles, and I did a little bit of research on that stuff, like the rate of profitability in Sri Lanka, and it's very interesting that the way you see it move matches very closely with all the social movements and the political upheavals in Sri Lanka, right? So when we enter a crash, that's the time usually that you have some kind of nationalist or left-leaning populist come up, and then you have a period of import substitution or export-oriented industrialization under Premadasa, and you have a moment, and then it peaks, and then it comes down again. So we're actually in the trough of one of these economic cycles, and as we discussed last time, this is actually the perfect time for politics, right? Because a lot of the contradictions are now just on the surface.
Yes.
Um, so, I think it's kind of the time for partisanship, right? To just basically take your stand and rally as many people as you can to your cause. I think to some extent, there's probably no making compromises and trying to be nice in the future, right?
Yes.
It's real politics now.
Actually, it's a good opportunity, Shiran, especially for the TikTok generation to actually to engage politics, because this is their future we are talking about. I am actually 38. You are much younger than me, but still, we are in the older generation compared to the youth of the country, and they have a responsibility. I think they have the capacity to take on the responsibility. They need to make up their own opinions. They need to actually understand what's been happening, what's going on, and what can be done to change it, because either now or never. uh, we have never been this low since 1948. uh,
Yeah.
1962 coup, it can be a very low point, but it was not economically low point. We could manage it. And right now the state and the the government both are hijacked by a group of people who have nothing but their own personal interest at heart. So this is the time for politics, for young people, women, especially young women actually. If you want to have social security, if you want to have a safe life, if you don't want to have the bloodbath of Lebanon, for example, or even Greece situation, this is the time for them to come up and take the stand. If they don't want to see themselves associated with the established party, then find your own political movement. I mean, two people can make three organizations in Sri Lanka, and this is not a very difficult thing. We have the will, we have the pain, the motivation. The great motivation is the pain. The opportunity is there. So either you actually let this neoliberal zombie mafia run us entirely to the ground, and we will be economic slaves and a destabilized and failed state for the next 50 years, or we actually do something about it. So I take this opportunity to make an appeal to everyone who's listening. Instead of repeating the talking points of the State Department or the British Council, or the EU, or the IMF, think alone your own heritage, or your own identity, who we are as people, and what we could do in the South Asian region for the regional peace, for the regional economic prosperity, the collective economic prosperity of Asia in general. We have a historic role to fulfill. But I mean, just saying it and repeating thousand times doesn't do anything. You just have to get to the street and stand for what you
Yeah.
want to stand for. Isn't it, Shiran?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, I think the trick is now going forward is to actually get a lot of the people who are politically disengaged, and that there is a new generation of voters. Perhaps I think even Gota actually benefited from that. There was a new influx of voters, and he got a lot of new young voters, and they're
Yeah.
probably very disenchanted right now. But I'm not convinced that they would just automatically jump to the UNP because of this
Yes.
failure.
Yes.
Um, it's a matter of finding them and being realistic. I think now the I mean, we all know what the UNP's traditional vote base is, right? The landlord merchant class, right? And the the sort of lower service sector workers who are attached to that whole sort of colonially oriented economy. And we all know that the left traditionally, when we had industries, there were industrial workers, but now, unfortunately, a lot of the left and the nationalist support is stuck in a very, in like the public sector, which historically people, in the left and in the nationalist circles have looked to these public sector unions to carry the struggle forward. And I'm of the opinion, probably controversial, that I think that's no longer tenable, because I think a lot of these public sector unions have become cartels in
Yes.
themselves.
Yes.
I also think, again, coming from a Marxist perspective, the labor that they do is not really productive labor. They're living off of tax revenue. They don't, they're not negotiating with private capital. They're not being exploited, of their surplus value or anything like that. So there's this whole group of people that are just left out of this public sector. I mentioned last time also the youth that don't make it to university. Where do they end up? where are they working? It's trying to engage, I think, all of those people, the people who are probably at the lowest levels of society, probably in rural areas that are working in the kind of production economy, not in the traditional areas of like tourism and the plantations and all of that, which goes with the UNP,
Yes.
or like the public sector that goes with the old left, or there's this like NGO professional managerial class that goes with the current perhaps JVP and all. So there is a class out there that I think is unrepresented, and
Yes.
I think we probably still don't have someone like a good anthropologist or a social scientist to make that analysis and to identify empirically who these people are. But I get a sense that there is a
Huge.
spectrum out there
Yes.
that's
Yes.
that's completely unrepresented in contemporary Sri Lankan politics, that they have no voice. So I think that's probably where the change will come from in the next few years. I mean,
Yes.
that's they have to achieve some sort of class consciousness and manifest a leader that can a
I mean,
leader and a movement.
it has happened few times before. I'm sure the
Yeah,
potential is there, and
I mean, yeah, nobody ever thought that the '56 revolution could have happened, right?
yes,
The
yes,
way uh,
because
Bandaranaike sort
yeah,
of managed to get all the movements.
I mean, it was not
Same.
it was not some racist uh, cross current that united them, as some of the neoliberals want to actually see it. It was the disenfranchised masses who actually realized together we can actually make a force. And
Sure.
in a time that everyone discounted them and discarded them as they are a spent force, we have pacified them, they are no longer relevant in Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan politics and economy and social power, it's our domain. I mean, the few families actually
Mm.
ran it like this. And then look how the country actually changed for the better because of the 1950s. There were a lot of negatives, things that could have done differently, true, but I got my social education, my educational opportunities, my social opportunities were mostly because of 56. Otherwise, I would also not have access to most of the resources that I had access to as a child. People like me, we were not the colonial cream, especially from my father's side at least. So it's an opportunity. I hope people actually listen to this kind of discussions. Even if you're not listening to it, then take the opportunity to represent and try to be the voice for the voiceless. I mean, if you speak English, if you think that your role is to go to Goldface and hold a slogan in English and scream in English, saying that we need justice and transparency, I mean, do it in a way that you represent the people who can't come there, who can't afford the bus fare or the lunch to be taken from a small shop to come to that protest. There are millions of people who are like this. It's the duty of people who can protest to protest not for their own benefit but for the benefit of the others, for the interest of the others, unless otherwise you are just doing it for your own fun. I mean, most of the support base in Colombo disappeared after Ranil became president because of this reason. I mean, they were protesting to protect their own family or personal or class or social interest. Uh, a large quantity of them. There were a huge number of people who were not, who honestly wanted to have a change, who didn't necessarily know what the change should be. But it's also an opportunity for people to actually understand what the change we really need, what the change they want, and stand for it and hope for the best. And there's opportunity to change. There's opportunity to uh, build a country that works for everyone, not for Colombo, not just for the Colombo 7 people, or the fake think tanks funded by the US State Department or the CIA proxies. So hope for the best. Let's have another similar conversation, a very interesting conversation we had today. Let's have another one
Yes.
sometime soon. Thank you, Shiran. Thank you for time.
Thanks, Santa.